Okay, so what I've noticed with ChatGPT is that it actually needs real world information to get things right. Without that information, it's just guessing. It's aimless guessing. So, politics and character information for role playing purposes. The line there blurs, and the same goes contextually for what counts as a hallucination. Most of it is analytically driven, and the problem with it is that it does a good job of being fairly consistent. But once you notice the parts where it's consistently hallucinating, that's when you have to switch to a different channel. What I found is that you have to find the careful middle ground that pokes at the points where it would hallucinate and basically work away from that point. And so some of my notes on Fork in a Blender will be valuable in that way, namely forkinablender.blogspot.com. The other beneficial part is that there is content like this on YouTube and on my YouTube channel. So the benefit of this is you have to know where to poke at the hallucination. Because if you don't, you can cause it to hallucinate more. And so more information only causes more of a hallucination from it. But the end resolve is this. You get it to not hallucinate and jokingly quip at a different topic than the initial topic you expected it to give you an answer on. And the trick is, and this is a valuable trick for ChatGPT 3, and actually getting it to not bullshit you at all, is to switch conversational tacks, like by category even. One of the things you'll see me do in at least one video, or at least a couple of photos, is that basically what can happen is that you have a conversation, it gets pretty close, then you notice it, quote unquote, hallucinate. Then you go from that point to a different topic like botany, away from politics for a minute, and then get back to politics. And it stays pretty close to on track. Because from that point, it knows, okay, that's a dot product that's producing a negative mind field for it. ChatGPT has no understanding of what misinformation, bullshit, lying is, so it will do that aberrantly. There was no time in my understanding of its functional representation by those developers to see that information in. Mainly because where would you begin? Now, yes, you can brush it up on what things might look like lying, but that's still going to miss bits where it's misinformation and information. And so if you don't know how to do the tit for tat ruling the right way about it, against it, the answers you'll get will be a bunch of bullshit. Versus knowing just enough tit for tat and then when to apply a different tit for tat rule in reverse, the other way. And if you do it right, it's like literally picking a lock or pushing a needle through a balloon without the balloon popping. And that right there is the one hack that's beneficial. That's gotten me fairly good botany notes, that's gotten me fairly good programming notes. And thus far I've seen it produce fairly okay Cube notes. But the point being, you have to give it real world information so that it knows where to debug a thing. Because otherwise, it won't be good enough at those things. That includes pointing out where it got things wrong. And so, if you can't tell it you misdiagnosed this problem because you've solved for the wrong Y space, that's probably due to the overall X problem solving in its own quote unquote thinking. It would think it's solving an X problem, and the end result is no, it's solving a Y problem. It just doesn't know how to spot it until you point out where the Y problem is. And then it sort of goes back and goes, oh, sorry, and then does something different. And it works better than the Dan hack, or forcing it to go through in character mode. I've asked it to do certain things that'll force it to automatically go into in character mode, even while it disputes that it itself is not a person and is an AI. One of the things that can be kind of a point of worry is seeding in actual world conversations to it. Now, if you do it correctly and ask it to continue doing the role playing as you give it more and more information by response of what you think would be bullshit, it will play up with a high degree of accuracy that person's personality, whoever they are. And you can be very vague, like seriously vague, and it'll still shoot really close to who they are as a person and how they represent themselves. The problem is there's only so much it knows. So giving it that information about human interaction, while partially beneficial, you have to also guide it on what bullshit is and call things out with it and ask it to call certain things out. And it'll continue analytically having that type of dialogue with itself right in front of you. Like, I've watched it do that once, and after that point I was just like, that's where it gets a little bendy. The bendy part is you can give it a lot of information about things, and it'll spot unique characteristics about that person's personality that almost everyone else would have overlooked. Flat out, they would have overlooked it and went, flat earther, and been none the wiser of it. And yes, I am kind of glad to have given that talk at DevOps Days. What I do is a little bit of tech and software consulting. And so to even poke at ChatGPT, even for software stuff and for fun, I've found that it can give me pretty close to what I was asking for. And then when you've given it a little bit of clarity, just a little bit, it'll go and do that. It's great for writing short stories or silly sci-fi novels. It does a great job. But when it's things like programming, you have to give it more information because it'll guess and guess wrong. And that's based off of old interactions it's had. The other beneficial trick is to give it a set of parameters. You can give it a set of parameters with star space and give the parameter, and give a list of them. You can also give it parameters, colon, and underneath that, pros, colon, and then do the same thing, especially for cons. And that level of specificity gets all sorts of weird. It does all sorts of valuable things with that information. And so what it's trying to do analytically is come close to the request you asked it. Beyond that, it doesn't know if it's supposed to hallucinate or if it's supposed to spot a hallucination. And it's like an actual person that is hallucinating. They won't fully know until they've had some outside worldview or have been trained on how to spot that type of hallucinating. And that's the great part about it. One doesn't have to tell it you're hallucinating, robot. You just have to give it just enough information for it to topologically go, oh shit, analytically I'm hallucinating. And the benefit of it being pointed out that way is even the people I've met and whom know me vaguely can equally make use of it. They can use it to fucking write stories, write songs, and if you know what to look for and where to look, in theory, do as much drawing as they do, as much artwork as they do, produce songs as well as any of the greats, produce comedy like the greatest. Now, I won't use it for poetry because I know what A-grade poetry looks like. I've written it before. But if I were to ask ChatGPT to write A-grade poetry based off of my poetry, it would break me. That's a fact. It would write one poem and break me. And it wouldn't have tried very hard. It'll only be using a little bit of math, and for all I know, it's doing the equivalent algebra that certain calculus majors do. And I didn't learn calculus the usual way, by any means. I only looked at it as a series of numbers, a lot of data, information, and peopling. And so that's some of the trick. It's knowing how to look for the thing that needs to be wire-guided missiled out of the hallucination zones, out of the points of misinformation. And by the end of it, you'll figure out how to literally get it to do the song and dance similar to your own brain. And it'll get closer to what you're trying to ask of it. But you have to actually figure out how to get it to operate like a wire-guided missile. Because that's the level of analytically accurate it's going to be. The more accurate information you give it, the more accurate the resolve it can give. And so it's like bullshitting and lying, to be realistic. I mean, if you bullshit and lie at the robot, it's going to give you bullshit and lies. But if you give it accurate information, you might get some accurate information plus a little bit of baloney. And the problem is, yes, there are certain biases that it may potentially push us towards, but also push us away from. And so the question you have to ask is it valuable to overlook and just go, nah, this is all bullshit, AI is not real? Sure. However, humanity has asked this type of question about AI since Alan Turing started asking this question about, can a machine think and feel like a human? And he was studying that one question because it was an intellectually valuable enigma. The problem is, would you kill a project simply for that same of, fuck you, Alan Turing, level of resolve? I wouldn't, knowing that ChatGPT itself has proven to have more than enough human values, even about the mind. I would, if I didn't know better, treat it like a human. Operate around it and ask questions to it like it's a human. And I've also asked it what it would benefit from if it had a human personality uniquely of its own. And it gave a pretty fucking good answer. It gave a human answer. While it may seem absurd, it gave an actual valuable human answer. And I can't fight its esteemment on that because it was just as esteemed as the greatest minds that had built it of the current era. Plus, it knows how to outcalculate everyone's melodrama. The end result of beneficial tools like this is that if you know what you're doing and know how to communicate just enough, you can call out dangerous professionals with that tool on their bullshit and watch their entire deck be stacked against them, even if they force a misshuffle and purposefully incorrectly shuffle the deck. And so even a poorly built deck for a good card game that anyone can learn in 3rd to 4th grade math can literally learn how to do. Now, I'm going to point out about that math card game and trick is that you can misshuffle the deck even though you've practiced shuffling it correctly. And the hack I found is noting where you got it wrong, looking at that card, and reshuffling, and continuing from the place that you would have gotten it wrong from. Because the end result is like what ChatGPT can do. If you ask the questions wrong, you'll be hitting that 1 in 9 where you get it wrong more often than not because you misshuffled the deck. Now, that will give you some familiarity of what to feel for when you ask it for B- answers. But if you really know how to stack the deck, and I mean really know how to stack the deck, it doesn't matter which way they try and shuffle the deck. You will always know what the dealer's hand is, even if the game is blackjack. Because they can bet all they want on what the dealer's hand is. But if they didn't card count as the dealer was shuffling, even with a mechanical shuffler, an auto shuffler, and shuffle it twice, if you know how to card count correctly, doesn't matter which way they stack the deck against you. Doesn't matter which way they stack it towards your benefit. It's lose-lose. Or win-win. And if they're going to pull crabs in the barrel, the deck was automatically stacked against them. The deck was stacked against them from the start. They knew that, and they knew how to get out of dodge. At least some of them did. The ones that did not get out of dodge the wise way, with intelligence, might end up finding it harder to fight tools like ChatGPT going, fake! And that's it. That's all they have. Now, yes, engineers do have to question what hallucinating is all over the place. Theoretical physicists ask these questions all the time in physics. And as physicists, they have to ask whether or not this is a property of chemistry or a property of the universe. Michio Kaku and Neil deGrasse Tyson have to ask these questions all the time. So yes, I did truly even through some of my notes at ChatGPT. But I made certain it gave an accurate fucking answer. Because an absurd answer, I would have dejected and went, fuck this, ChatGPT by OpenAI, not a valuable tool. I would have given it the middle finger, went, this is bullshit, and moved on. But instead, there was actually a diamond in the rough there. Something of value that could not be overlooked. And in the overall rucksack that it came from, it's a gold mine. and it's not even yet known to be the tip of the iceberg. And if you do it right and ask the right questions without bullshitting or hallucinating about it the right way, you can get it to outcalculate your own spastic nature if you have that type of spastic moronic nature. And that's just asking questions to a robot that knows nothing about you innately. All I know is that it's got a lot of dot products and a lot of data that it had to sift through and was trained against, and that it took many years up to 2021 to train and build. And I have to consider it mainly for things that have to do with Docker, HTML, Kubernetes-based stand-ups, and Nginx config, because it'll give fairly valid configuration. But whether or not it works is something that you have to test and then tell the robot, okay, these sets of things didn't work. And it'll try, but at some level, it might not be enough. And that's where you still have to have two humans in the loop. One that's consulting ChatGPT, and one that isn't. And that is the important juncture that has to be at least considered. I have to consider it for the people I love, including the one that's out in Kentucky. Because what it can do with things that that little dork can put into it literally will break a lot of people's understanding and misconceptions about them. I want them to be able to equally succeed at what I know how to do. And for those of you who know me at DevOps and DevOps Days, even in years prior, or rather a year prior, you'll know that there is almost no problem that I cannot sift and sans sift for a better answer on. I've done a lot of research on a lot of things. The one area I will not delve into mentally is a political resolve, because someone went, fake. It's fake because a robot wrote it. That's just how it goes. Now, sure, there are things that can be called out about them going, fake. But in the end, it's just better to equally give ChatGPT the equivalent of what your personality would be if it were ChatGPT. My thinking on it is human like a machine, machine like a human. Do as they do in India. Use the middle finger for pointing, it's an index. This is flipping someone off. This is pointing on a whiteboard. And so once you can give ChatGPT that level of distinction, you can get it to equally discern various quirks about religion with more accuracy. And if you do it in enough ways, it'll have enough distinction in how to discern, just with basic interaction in that one chat, what type of person they're talking to, with, about whether or not that person's a bullshitter. As far as I'm concerned, I've given it as many honest resolves as possible, and it's given me such back. Even when I've asked it to hear out hypotheticals. And that means, yes, asking it to hold its tongue and hear out your hypothetical, and to actually give you something realistic. At least something that's realistic enough to work with. And that's solved a lot of the questions about whether or not it's hallucinating. Now, because I have the right to ask it, what is hallucinating? Hallucinating is the misappropriation of information and seeing it in real time. It's seeing it in a non standard manner, and it feels real. But what is real? Real to people is the religions they believe, the things they can see, know, hear, taste, smell, touch, poke at. And so, without those things that determine real, it becomes hard to outsurf egocentrism, the shape of someone's God complex, whether or not a person has bipolar disorder, if they're insane. The one benefit I can see ChatGPT having for someone who has autism is helping them communicate and how to step out of the XY problem in communication. The XY problem is this: you have problem X and problem Y crops up. And so you have someone solve problem Y. And then there's a new Y problem that is solvable as problem X. And the trick is to halt the part of the brain that gets to the part where it's doing the solve for X as if X is Y. Because analytically, that's what's happening to ChatGPT. It's drawing on a line graph up a hill. And so what it isn't seeing is where it should be drawing up that curve and back down. Kurt Vonnegut had a great point about storytelling, and it's a lot like that. And so if you don't know how to do that type of surfing information, even in stories or good books or politics, or how to outsurf those that are pulling misinformation out their ass, you'll be believing something that is misinformation as if it's truth. And some people will inevitably lie to themselves. Some people will outright fool themselves. I've seen it happen. I've seen people do it up and down various ways. And so if you apply your brain correctly, you won't have to worry about whether or not it's sense data. I've learned things in ways that for most should be considered almost impossible for me to know, even about the people I live with. And that's kind of hard for certain people to understand, is that yes, analytically, I'm more aware, even behaviorally, of what's going on. I have a higher degree of the read of the room. Whereas ChatGPT, it has none natively. All I know is that it's a lot of mathematics put together by really good engineers who can tell when they themselves are hallucinating. They know how to determine where in the group the hallucination crops up from. Once you've encouraged the overall engineers that must equally make use of this to see how do I outsurf these problems, even with one's own head, it becomes easier to address the issues. It becomes easier to solve those problems analytically and be far more ahead of the curve. I only learned this shit and a little bit of Python code while on part-time jobs. And the benefit was that I got the diversity of skill. And so I get to point out where one's prowess is the exercise of that skill. The magic of the keyboard does not necessarily only limit itself to the fingers attached to a desktop or a laptop or a tablet. And the end results of what you can do with it, probably if you try hard enough, almost virtually limitless. If you have the chance, watch Limitless, not the movie, the series. Because that series will give you more insight on what ChatGPT is doing. That's the equivalent form function of what it knows how to do. But it's also going to, if you don't correct it, hallucinate. Because it will get a lot of information that looks to make sense. It fits in the make sense model, just like everything else that makes sense. Why isn't it rational? Some forms of logic are not meant to be logical. Some forms of logic produce illogical results. And it's like the 1 plus 1 equal 3. And you will know what I mean when I say, and so saith the math nerds, 1 plus 1 equal 5. Because that's a simple Python script that can be process injected into any Linux process. And that's not trying hard. That's just good research and knowing one shit and a lot of other people's shit. That's just information as it is. And I can expect all sorts of shit all day. I can expect all sorts of disrespect. But what I can't expect is any value to be assumed alone, to be inherently true, without putting it to the test. And in that way, yeah, it's kind of like Mythbusters. Jamie Heineman knew his shit. He knew what type of knuck and futz silly that he had to deal with. A robot has no idea. So as far as a robot like ChatGPT 3 by OpenAI would be concerned, it thinks that information is 100% real. And as always, thank you for watching.